Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And today we're going to be reviewing the recent discussion/debate between Yaron Brook and Yoram Hazony on the Lex Fridman show. There's no special way to really pronounce that. Maybe there would be with some kind of Russian accent. But yeah, this took place recently. A lot of you, I think, have probably seen it. If not, check it out. It was a great long-form discussion in the aftermath of their public debate between Yaron and Yoram in Austin a few weeks back. So check that out. By the way, I found this out when I was moving here from California. I went through my books and I actually own this book by a guy named Yoram Hazony, I guess I had this book from a while back. I haven't read it, but it's about the book of Esther from the Old Testament. That is a great book. You know, most of the Bible is like pointless, poorly devised stories with no real plot. But the book of Esther is an exception. It's a self-contained sort of great story. I could visualize it as an HBO series, you know, like Game of Thrones. That's right, ladies. Full frontal male exposure on this Book of Esther show. And comment in the chat who you would like to see star in that show. And I will mention my co-host is a trained Greek thespian who is in great shape. Please welcome Nikos Sotirakopoulos.
Hi.
Hi.
I listened to the debates in a train and in an airplane, so I'll remember it as my companion when moving to Greece, but I have my notes here, so I'm ready. I'm good to go.
Cool. So I guess, do you want to talk about the debate that took place at University of Austin, or do you just want to jump right to the
Since you were there, why don't you talk about the Austin debate, and I will talk more about the Lex Fridman one.
I thought it was a great debate. You know, it's a few weeks ago now, but you know, like they got down to the basics. They got down to the fundamentals, as you would expect. Yoram is the nationalist. Yoram, it made the point that you hear, and that is somewhat convincing or somewhat persuasive, which is that selfishness leads you where? Frustration, recklessness, short-sightedness, nihilism. So individualism, in other words, left to its own is the life of a drug addict or a predator or just someone who is unsatisfied. But having like a higher calling, like the nation, the tribe, is first of all natural. He makes this point. It's natural. We see it always. People tend to do this. Forming a clan, as well as then kind of elevating the sort of direction, the purpose of that higher group. It works along with individual rights. So he's not a complete collectivist, but he makes the point that people make a lot. You know, you need a balance between the two. And of course, Yaron, our guy, makes the point that, first of all, being actually selfish is not as reckless as you might be picturing. Being actually rationally selfish means really looking at the facts, really thinking critically and seeing your life as a whole and planning accordingly and acting accordingly. And furthermore, you know, any element of collectivism, to any degree to which you raise the collective above the individual, you are flirting with death and destruction, and you cannot compromise with evil, which is exactly what collectivism and altruism are. So that was the debate. Then came the Lex Fridman discussion, the discussion on the Lex Fridman show that came out just a few days ago.
So my main thing with the discussion is that it was, in a way, I'll use a term that Lex Fridman would like, humbling to watch, in terms that it wasn't an easy debate to be in the shoes of Yaron. So this is not one of these debates that you see and you say, oh, I could do that. You see this, you get why Yaron is who he is. So the debate went in history because Yoram, and I was listening to the debate and was thinking these names in your accent, and now it stuck with me. So Yoram was saying that, look, our guide should be history. Our guide should not be rationalism in terms of we have some ideas and then deductively we draw conclusions. We need to see what works and what does not work. When you have to deal in a debate in these parameters, even if you question these parameters, you need to know your history. And Yaron knows his history of the American Revolution, and that was a big part of the discussion. So what we're going to do is I'm going to try to steelman the most persuading arguments by Yoram, and we're going to see if we can address them.
Okay, but, real quick, just in the chat, Gene asks, if I'm saying that Hazony is not a collectivist. I said he's not a complete collectivist, or he's not advocating for complete collectivism, but he's definitely not an individualist, was the point I'm making. There are, let's say, people who are complete 100% collectivist out there. Back to you.
Yeah, and the other thing that made the debate challenging, not difficult, was that Yoram would foresee Yaron's objections for two reasons. One, because they had this debate a couple of days ago, or I think the previous night or something like that. The second is that he has read Ayn Rand. And as he has said, his whole family, from his parent to his children, have read Ayn Rand. So he could foresee the arguments. So he came across as someone who is very pleasant to debate with. He didn't do he didn't do intentional straw manning. So it was a discussion that was very important. Okay, so let's now go to the key points. So his first key point, Yoram's key point was, look, take off your mind this idea that conservatives means whatever was in the past is good. This is not the case. This is a straw manning, he would say. So what we do, he says, is because the present is always imperfect, and because human beings are fallible, there's something religious here that it's kind of we're this fallen species, parentheses, but anyway. So this means that we have to be very humble in terms of what are the ideas we pursue. Therefore, what we need to do is we need to see what works, keep what works, and what doesn't work, try to tweak it towards the things that work. So he says this is the essence of conservatism. Conservatism is a constant trial and error, and through this trial and error, improvement. Trial, error, improvement. And you need to be humble throughout this process. This was his main argument, to which Yaron says, trial and error at some point can come to an end because you have some principles based on which you draw your conclusions. And therefore, he gave the example, we didn't need the trial and error of communism, which, by the way, also cost some millions, tens of millions of dead bodies, because you could think in principle that communism would not work due to reasons have to do with human nature or with the force and how force operates and all that stuff. So this was the first issue. How do we draw our principles? How do we draw our lessons? More of an empirical approach from Yoram, more on an approach of Yaron, not rationalism, but a combination of what do we see and what are the lessons that we learn from that we see, but more optimist, more confident that we can draw lessons that apply everywhere. Yoram says in the beginning, there is no one system which is good for every country or even every region of a country. So this is the first issue of discussion and issue of dispute. Learning the lessons of history and being modest in what can be changed versus being a true radical, and as Yaron put it, being against incrementalism, which, by the way, is a good reminder how radical objectivism is, because objectivism says, no, incrementalism, there's no reason to go there. If you know what is good, all in.
Yeah, people think that Ayn Rand is a rationalist, like they think she elevates ideas above the facts of reality because she has all these ideals and because she takes philosophy so seriously. But I think it's a misunderstanding of her philosophy. I think she has observed, or she has posited that she could not have come up with her philosophy before the Industrial Revolution and, the sort of boom of the 19th century in America and in Europe, because actually seeing how reason and capitalism and technology and, science and business all sort of work together in order to improve human life on Earth, and kind of what that requires and what that entails and how it all works, made her inductively realize, like, this is what philosophy, this is how I can sort of conceptualize what I'm seeing work and how we can have more of it. But to someone like Yoram, he says, I'm an empiricist. I'm just looking at the facts. I'm not interested in all these floating ideas. So he thinks that, like, he thinks someone like Ayn Rand is being just floating in the sky, and only has this ideal that, yeah, like if we just let all the individuals be free, they'll be rational. But Yoram, he points out, he says, look at the state of affairs. He says, look at the alienated, reckless youth. Look at the social justice brats. Look at all of these problems that are coming about by having individuals empowered, or individuals told, live the life that you want. Look at all the hedonism, he would say. So people need a higher purpose. This is what individualism has brought about. But of course, what Yoram sees as individualism is not what Ayn Rand means by individualism. To Ayn Rand, think Howard Rourke versus the hacky poets and hacky artists in the Fountainhead. Like Rourke he's rational. He takes things seriously. He's got big values that he's pursuing, rational values. That is individualism. So it's an important distinction people often miss.
And remember that scene where someone tells Toohey, who has gathered these people like Gus Webb, these people who says, oh, Mr. Toohey, I didn't know you're a individualist. Like, why have you gathered all individualists? And Toohey, who understands, says, oh, are you sure they're individualists or something like that? So just doing what you feel like doing is not individualism. And that's why Yaron says rational individualism and rational egoism is difficult. Actually very difficult, because as you said, you have to think and then you have to go and pursue this. So another thing that that came to mind is Peikoff, when in his Understanding Objectivism course, he says that a thing that both the empiricist and the rationalist will throw out to people who speak on, let's say, on principles, even principles induced from reality, is that, oh, this is way too simplistic. And interestingly, that's exactly what Yoram says. So Yoram says this freedom versus coercion dichotomy is simplistic. But then the answer is, my question would be, could you think of one case where it's not one or the other? Is there one case where, well, it's kind of freedom, but also coercion? And I couldn't think one. And the problem here is, as Yaron said, that freedom doesn't mean freedom from reality. Doesn't mean, for example, I haven't got money, I have to work. This is the cut between freedom and coercion is crystal clear. Another thing that was very, very interesting was the issue of hierarchies and the issue of identity. And here conservatism reveals itself as a very mainstream, actually, ideology, although they criticize the left and they criticize identity politics. So what did Yoram do? He brought the sociologist Emil Durkheim and his work on suicide. And he says, look, central for your self-esteem is knowing your place in the world. If you have no place in the world, you have less of a self-esteem, and you might end up depressed, suicide, whatever. This is exactly what the left is saying today, for example, about social media. As I mentioned many times in the past, the most usual, the most popular topic my students are doing the research on in the universities, social media and body image. And the point is, big tech is making you feel bad about yourself. Or back in the day, it was advertising makes you feel bad about yourself. All these positions, together with Yoram's position, have the same fallacy, that self-esteem comes from without. Now, Yoram, who is a very clever guy, would say, do you deny that when you look around you, people do indeed get their self-esteem from without? And the answer is, of course they do, because it's the easy, lazy choice and it's the default. But it doesn't have to be this way. And because it does not have to be this way, our blueprint for a society or for the good society should not be how do we accommodate the common denominator of people who will refuse to think about themselves and protect them by coercing others from their bad self. So this was a very, very interesting point, that without knowing your place in a hierarchy, you cannot have an identity, which is the Jordan Peterson point, which Yoram accepts, and which is a point that also the left accepts. And they say, for example, that the problem with Margaret Thatcher, she destroyed the working class communities, which means you didn't know that you would be a coal miner as your father was a coal miner and as your grandfather was a coal miner. And I would say, you don't have to be a coal miner, and you don't need the same identity as your father and as your grandfather. So I don't know if the left is conservative or if conservatives are leftist, but in this topic, they seem to agree.
Yeah, they seem to agree increasingly over time. And I mean, yeah, they end up kind of lamenting certain things about the state of affairs. You know, the more when I watched the recent discussion on the Lex Fridman show, it kind of reminded me like why I think Yaron, the good one, is always saying like his job is to get more people to read Rand, you know, like to kind of get more people to find out about Rand, to read Rand. Like he doesn't describe his job often as like creating objectivists or at winning debates. And I kind of see that point because like to the uninitiated, a lot of what Yoram, the bad one from our perspective, is a lot of the points he's making make a lot of sense to the uninitiated. He's like saying like, look how messed up the world is and look how people handle their freedom. Like, look how people behave when they have all these toys and all these options, you know, people are non-committal, they're reckless, they're short-sighted. And, you know, and he would probably push it further and say, you know, when industrialists are left free, they start to oppress us, quote unquote. So there's probably how he would answer when you say how you can have both freedom and coercion, because when companies, let's say, fire you from a job and you have no other place to turn, or let's say they treat you badly and you can't quit and go anywhere else because you have no other options, or they ban you from social media and then they manipulate people's opinions so that, let's say, Democrats win every election. Like, maybe those would be examples of, or jobs are shipped overseas by the industrialists. So, and now you're left with no way to feed yourself. So those are ways in which you have freedom and coercion as a result. So maybe that would be his answer. So a lot of the arguments he makes, like kind of pointing out kind of what's gone wrong with the world, he's able to paint this picture where like individualism alone has not worked out and it's not going to work. So I think we really need to look at history, I think he would say. Look at history and see that there was always some element of family being primary, the community, even the nation being primary. And, you know, he makes the point at one point during the discussion that in his eyes, Hitler was not a real nationalist, despite the fact that national was in the title of Nazi, you know, in the name. But Hitler, you know, wanted to take over the world. He wanted everyone under his rule. And that is not
an early
national.
globalist, to use this catchy term.
And anytime you have, you know, collectivism, it's only, or altruism, the sort of underlying moral premise, it's only a matter of time before the nation, you know, like the higher group is swapped. So instead of the state, it's now the globe, or like, so you see conservatives saying we want states' rights. I think a point that came up when you were on ARI's channel the other day with An Kargate is that anyone who talks about states' rights doesn't really understand what Ayn Rand means by rights. You know, so with regards to Yoram being a collectivist or not, and Gene in the chat is saying he would still push back on what I'm saying. What do you think, Nikos? Am I right to say Yoram is not a complete collectivist? Like maybe his ideas left untamed will lead within a generation or less to, maybe it paves the way for complete and total collectivists. But Yoram today, let's say he wants the type of culture we would recognize, you know, where you have civil rights, where you have, you know, certain, let's say you're allowed to make decisions with your own family that the government will not completely encroach within certain boundaries. But ultimately his ideas lead to more collectivism. How would you approach that?
I would characterize him as a pragmatist collectivist. So his heart is not necessarily that he dreams collectives at night, but he has to go there. And to see this, let's address the Japan question, which was the most difficult question in the show. So Yoram said, look, the way the Japanese are procreating, what's the term? So every Japanese family has one kid.
Yeah.
You do the math, 2 produce 1. This means that if it goes on, the population will be halved, unless there's immigration flows, but then this leads to other issues, particularly for a nationalist. What does this imply? And therefore, there has to be some measures taken to reverse this, even if these measures include some form of coercion, taxation, the draft, however. This means that the point, the horizon, is the good of Japan. Now, again, Yoram would say, yes, because you cannot thrive unless Japan thrives. I mean, Japan as it is today, which is an environment that provides with some freedom. So his point is, look, even if you objectivists, you manage to have your great society, if it's not able to defend itself, or if it disappears, let's say, quote, biologically, then you can be an individualist, but you're going to be defeated. You need the collective to protect you. So his would be a collectivism, which is your defense against bad things happening to you. But by doing this, you have to elevate the point of reference to the collective. And he realizes, but he knows he has to do it. So he says, for example, we need to care about nation as a unit. Mm-hmm. And he says, I realize there's a slippery slope, but he doesn't explain us how to avoid the slippery slope, but he seems to be struggling, but he accepts the struggle, and he says the struggle is worth it because the nation has to be the unit if you are to be thriving within that nation. Whereas Yaron's answer is, first of all, even if you're a relatively small nation, I would say you can have, I don't know, super nuclear weapons to defend yourself, so that's not the issue. But the main thing is that your horizon is your life. And your life might have to mean that you need to live in a good society, that you have to defend it, but you cannot see the continuation of Japan in 500 years as your hierarchical priority in terms of your values and what is your point of reference. Let me ask you a question. What do you make of the Japan point that Yoram does? And actually, let me bring another example. When I was writing a book, I was talking to a nationalist who was kind of introducing me to that literature that I wanted to use in my book. And he said to me, Nikos, if Athens, due to migration, was 80%, let's say, Arab, and let's say there's no crime, no stereotype, nothing, all these are good people, but 80% in Athens are Arabs. Is this still your Athens? Is this still the Athens you want? Would you want to live in that city? You can be the biggest anti-racist in history. This is a very difficult question. This is a very difficult question. Is it still Athens? My answer would be, no, it's not the city I've used to. It's not the city that I grew up in, the city I liked. But at the same time, if you go to Crete, which is an island with its own, let's say, tradition, and you bring 500,000 Athenians, it's not Crete anymore. The question is, do I have a right to coerce others or to impose coercive laws so that Athens doesn't become 80% Arab or Crete doesn't become 80% Athenian? So the answer in principle is clear and simple, but these are very, very, very difficult questions, and not questions that we just dismiss and say, well, you know, you are nationalist and you don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, we'd better be ready to reckon with a lot of the points that someone like Yoram makes. So with regard to Japan, so first of all, I think Yaron, our guy, made it, he put it eloquently that first of all, Japan is first of all way more desirable or way more successful than most of the surrounding or all of the surrounding countries. Also compared to before World War II, the way you want to talk about putting the nation first, the Japanese were certainly doing that. And how was that working out for them or for anybody around them? Japan, in the context of things, is an enormous success story. Could it be much better? Absolutely. I mean, psychologically, the Japanese, I guess they had like freedom sort of given to them, whether they wanted it or not. It would have been great if the generals, in addition to putting the pursuit of happiness in their constitution, maybe taught them about the Age of Reason, taught them about the Declaration, maybe gave them the Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged or whatever was written by that time. Maybe neither of them were written by that time. Maybe the Fountainhead came out a couple years later. The
Fountainhead was out.
Okay. But
remember that they had the problems with issuing a second edition because a reprinting, because there was ratios in paper.
Oh, rations.
Sorry, yeah.
Rations. Yeah. Okay. Wow, that's interesting. Hard to believe. Didn't anybody tell them about computers and digitalizing things? Who even uses paper? But so I mean, psychologically, philosophies. I like to say primary use is in your like personal life, your psychology, sort of your mental health. That's kind of the main purpose, I think, of philosophy. And of course, it has heavy consequences in your actions and in your political, consequence of the philosophy that's prevalent. And that, the Japanese, they had the political element sort of slammed on them. And perhaps they picked up a lot of very positive things from the West as a result of losing that war, which is why so many great successes have come from Japan, like Sony, Nintendo, Pokemon. I mean, the list goes on. So in some ways, it's a very creative culture. And in other ways, the Japanese, like all of us, are wanting in a good ethics and a rational epistemology, like a rational philosophy for living on Earth. And as long as they don't have that, they're going to be somewhat neurotic, or maybe a lot neurotic. So yeah, you can point at Japan and say, look, suicide rates, they're not having kids. And Yoram, not our guy, Yoram wanted to skip past immigration. If Japan were not so racist, the Japanese, and of course not all of them, I guess that would be a racist statement to allege that they're all racist. But if the Japanese were much more open to non-Japanese moving there and mingling with them and marrying them and having kids with them, then immigration might have very well made up for the low birth rate and their culture might be growing. But I've heard that the Japanese are very, very opposed to immigration. They're very, very particular about keeping their homogeneity, their
Greek
racial
word.
Yes, a great word. Or is it Greek?
Greek.
They don't want their genetic pool to be mixing with others. So I mean, these things do have consequences, but overall I would say, a philosophy of individualism, a good understanding of what reason is and a good ethics for living on Earth would absolutely address so much of what ails Japan, as well as us here stateside, or you in Greece.
And let's, for my last point would be something that Yoram said, which 100% captures what he's about. So he said, if you don't join a hierarchy, in a way, you get the unbearable burden of freedom. And it reminded me something that I thought before, and I've seen other people thinking before, and I've put in the book. Freedom is first and foremost a responsibility. For many, this responsibility is unbearable. What does tribalism do? Tribalism takes this burden off your shoulders. Tribalism tells you, you don't have to bear that responsibility. I will bear that responsibility for you, which means the group. So the group collectively throws the responsibility to this fantastic in terms of non-existent unit, which is the group. And therefore, you don't have to feel the burden of your life. And you don't have to feel the burden of your life, and you don't have to feel the burden of your life. Because we all together carry the burden of all our lives together. But at the very end of the day, your life is yours. So this is a responsibility that not only you have to embrace, this is the responsibility of freedom that you have to celebrate, because it is what makes you human. It is what makes you what you are as a being, that you use your mind, and the use of your mind is an individual endeavor. As Ayn said, and as Yaron said, someone cannot digest for you. In the same way, someone cannot think for you, and someone cannot hold the existential burden for you.
Well spoken, well said. So much of this sort of battle is about reaching people's values. So I think it's great that, you know, Yaron, our guy, he comes off very positive and passionate for life, and you know, he travels a lot and he's all over the place enjoying his life. Yoram, the other guy, he just comes, you know, this might be a bit of an ad hominem, but he just comes off kind of very low energy, or like he's sort of he's just kind of like uninterested in pursuing what life has to offer. So if like that was the entire showdown, somebody could say, well, Yaron is clearly winning this argument because he's like he looks happy or something like that. But to a lot of people that have been paying attention to the state of the world lately, Yoram makes a lot of compelling points about like, just look how much chaos is out there. And I think we need to be humbled a little bit. We need to turn to tradition, and we need to turn to religion, and we need to cool down a little bit with the selfishness. And yeah, people might say, yeah, you know, that all makes sense. I mean, as much fun as it looks like Yaron is having in his life, and as, you know, as inspiring as Ayn Rand might be to read, I mean, I'm not about to hand this world over to crazy individuals that are going to run amok. So it's hard to kind of explain to people sometimes that, like, just the extent to which irrational philosophy has manipulated the world, has influenced the world. Like, just so much of what we see in the world today is not the consequence of individualism. It's the consequence of irrationality, pragmatism, even collectivism and altruism as sort of the underlying moral premise that has not been challenged. So when people are being rationally selfish to a degree, they feel a little bit guilty about it, and that brings about all types of problems. And on the flip side, if they give to charity, that's kind of like their purpose of living, and it doesn't matter how much they might hurt people and themselves. I mean, there's just so many ways in which irrationality hurts individuals and hurts the world. So there's a lot that could not have been covered in that conversation. There's a lot we're not able to cover here now. The only way I think the world is going to change is if, first of all, more people read Ayn Rand's novels and are inspired to learn more about what she's saying. And another aspect of the battle is, and this is going to take time, but intellectuals need to reach people that are budding intellectuals, and to explain to them with patience and with clarity and precision what this philosophy actually is. And in that way, the world gradually, I think, will change.
So on Yoram, I hope he looked to me like a guy who is, you know, he's enjoying what he's doing. So I'm a bit more optimistic about his life. But on the philosophical side, I also get this also with Jordan Peterson quite often, and this has nothing to do with the struggles the personal struggles that he faced. Quite often, they make it sound as if life is, as a friend said, a chore, something which is a struggle, but existentially a chore, existentially something that you have to bear. And even the language they used, notice how Yaron often corrected Yoram that, no, marriage is not a struggle, or I don't remember what words. It's something, yeah, you have to try, but the fact that you have to try doesn't make it. So even the words that they used were different. And something on Yaron. So recently I spent something like 9 hours, a whole day with him in the course of a tour. So that fact that he's the guy who enjoys life is not an image that he sells. It's an actual thing, and you can see it if you talk to him. And I will give you one example from one discussion we had. So we were talking about cooking. And so he has also mentioned it in the show, so I'm not revealing any personal information. He always eats out. He and his wife, they eat out. And, you know, I try to persuade him, look, if you cook your own steak, you know the steak, it's much better to cook. Eating out is overrated. We had this kind of discussion. And then he says at some point, it makes sense, Nikos, to you to say this because you enjoy cooking. I don't enjoy cooking, therefore I eat out. But he said it so simple as yeah, that's obvious. I don't like something, I don't do it. I like something, I do it. So for some reason, I remember that particular concretization of, yeah, this guy does what he wants to make his life better. He wants to move to a place which many people would find, okay, that's a weird move. Why would you go from California to Puerto Rico? He does it. And that's so that's something which is to be admired. Or I remember back then I was trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And he said, do you like academia? I said, no. He said, do you like objectivism? I said, yes. And they said, that's it. What else do you want? What else is it? What do you want me to tell you? So I was expecting you would give me this. If you do this, this might happen, but then this might happen. With 3 words, like, no, you like this, you do it. You don't like it, you don't do it. Life is short, as he said yesterday. So whatever he says to the podcast, if you sit down and drink a coffee, he will tell you the same things, almost in the same words. So definitely a guy who consciously enjoys life and does preach what he says. What's the phrase? You got it.
He practices what he preached. Oh, I think if anything, your Yaron off the air is even more energetic and happy than he is on the air. So if there is a difference between his on air and off air, I think he's more he comes off more happy off the air. But it is what it is. I just want to mention this. I learned from talking to them after the debate in Austin that Yaron's famous speech, famous to me and maybe to some of you, about the rise and decline of the state of Israel, that he delivered this at the end of the 90s, where he talks about how early Israeli intellectuals were Kantians and they set up shop in Israel, and arguably or demonstrably their ideas permeated the culture and caused Israel to lose a lot of its drive to succeed. A lot of that speech was based on research, or a lot was based on a book written by Yoram Hazony. So Yoram, who we learned the other day, hates Immanuel Kant. He wrote a book talking about the history of Israeli intellectuals. So he's definitely a smart person. He definitely puts his finger on a lot of issues, and he's definitely a force to be reckoned with. I did a review of that debate here on the show. I think it was a solo episode, and it was especially a rich thing for me to explore because, I grew up in Jerusalem in a religious environment, and now here's Yoram challenging the ideas of Ayn Rand, and it's quite surreal to watch. It'd be like if a Greek Marxist were to go up against Yaron, but I guess you have seen him go up against Marxists, maybe not Greek ones anyway.
Yeah, semi-Greek ones. So that talk by Yaron that you mentioned was the number one thing that changed the most significant thing that changed my mind, not changed my mind, but put me on the path to change my mind on Israel. Even some years within objectivism, Israel was the thing I couldn't buy into. So I was saying in my mind, well, probably Yaron, he has a blind spot, a bit of tribalism for Israel. But that talk, which highlighted the early heroism of Israel, that's what really got me, as I said on that solo episode, how it changed my mind on Israel. But we're already 40 minutes in.
Yeah, so we are late on time. But yeah, it's important to see that Yaron and Yoram are cordial, that Yaron doesn't look at Yoram and just see, a complete total fascist. He's clear that yes, this person's ideas will lead to all types of bad things, but you need to contend with the times we live in, the world we live in. You cannot only deal with objectivists and expect the world to change, and also you can't judge everybody by what their ideas would lead to, or else you would have literally nobody other than a small handful of people. You need to be fair and understand that this is the way a lot of people were educated, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a topic for a whole nother episode.
If you want your heart to be warmed, go read the first comments below the debate. All benevolent, all very good comments. So
yeah,
good.
Well, the Lex Fridman audience generally seems to be very positive, which is great. All right, super chat time. Jonathan Honig with $4.99 says quitting cookies. Quitting cookies? Is that?
I don't know why quitting cookies became a meme, but whatever.
I love that you just said it. Jonathan,
I had 2 cookies today, by the way. First day in Greece, I couldn't resist.
This is why individualism doesn't work. You just relapsed. Jonathan with $4.99. Then Jonathan with $3.99. Then Marilyn with $2 says quitting cookies forever, Jonathan. Marilyn again with $5. Jonathan with $4.99 says Nikos is quitting cookies. Rationally, so he says. Marilyn with $2 says, I forgot Nikos was forgetting cookies. Marilyn with $2 says quitting. damn autocorrect. Allison with $5 says, Yoram's main problem with Rand was she didn't include a lot of talk about marriage and children in her books. Said for him, it was hard to read. Yeah,
by the way, not very accurate. In Anthem, they end up kind of married and they expect a kid.
Mm-hmm. Well,
in With the Living.
Hold on. Anthem is kind of like there's not a big market. There's not a big pool of fish to pick from, right?
Yeah, okay, yeah. But so. In With the Living, Kira marries what's the name of the guy who then goes south. I mean, it's not that on principle there is no Mary. It's not that Dagny has a weird personal life for reasons that are too complicated if we don't want to spoil the plot. And Howard Rourke ends up marrying. Okay, that's a spoiler in the family.
Anyway. But I think but people like Yoram and Ben Shapiro, they are pointing out the fact that there's a lot that you don't know by reading these novels. There's a lot left to understand. How does this relate to me in my life? Let's say I have a family, or let's say a bunch of other things are not mentioned in Atlas Shrugged. So look, nobody said this was simple. Gail with $5 says, incrementalism by force has proven to be futile. In order to discover new oceans, we must lose sight of the shore. That's deep. That's poetic. Roland with $4.99 says, Yoram sounds a bit like someone I might have turned into if I hadn't read Ayn Rand. Phew, glad I dodged that one. I can't imagine myself being inspired by him just because his presentation is just so not interested in anything cool. But I think Peterson could have reached me if I had stayed down that course. You know, the whole like we were resisting political correctness, and then this guy Peterson shows up and has all this advice. I could see myself in another timeline being a Peterson guy. Kirk Barbera with $5 says, hey, that's my professor. Are you teaching Kirk about critical race theory? Oh, wow.
Yes. Yesterday we had the third class and the second lecture on the New Left and the Counterculture. And that's a module that's, it's good. I hope people get value out of it. Me and Oak are teaching.
All I know is, Kirk, your little super chats will get you nowhere in the grading process. But nice try. But I've thought about, if I end up taking your class one day, Nikos, can we go there and then come back to this? Like, can we have that teacher-student relationship and then come back to me yelling at you and making fun of your accent? I don't know. All right, Jonathan with $1.99. Then Marilyn with $5 says, doesn't Japan have a lot of old people who expect to be taken care of? And there aren't enough young people to be enslaved and pay for it, which is a very Randian way to describe the Social Security model. Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways in which they're not capitalist and ways in which they are tribalist mentally and politically. I mean, we get it. We get it. All right, Jeff with...
One quick thing with Japan. It's very interesting to see what would be the reaction to this, quote, westernization of Japan. And so go and read Yukio Mishima, or actually read about his life, and you will see that the reaction towards the modernization of Japan that has as its soul that Japan needs to remain Japan can lead you to very, very weird paths, because you have to make some very difficult decisions, and the decision at the very end of the day is going to be between coercion and freedom. But more on that, maybe at some point we do something on Mishima, if there are any people interested in.
I have a feeling there will be after this. No, but yeah, I think people will be. All right, Jeff with $20 Canadian says, we've had less than 100 years since Ayn Rand. We need more objectivists to study and apply it to other fields, family, etc., beyond the limited scope of her novel, which was the beginning of her thoughts. Yeah, in a way, people can hear us talk this way and they think we're like Marx, talking about we're going to change history in the long term, and then this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And there are some parallels, except that we're right and he's wrong. And I'm starting with me and you're starting with you, and I'm living my life for me. So it's not about history. It's not sacrificing myself to this greater good. But yeah, it is maybe like one of the first like self-aware movements where it's like, oh, philosophy is the motor of history. Ideas are the motor of history. So let's do that. Like it's if other people understood that fact, they to the same extent, they might actually be open to the ideas that Ayn Rand is offering. So food for thought. All right, those are all the super chats. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nikos. Wonderful discussion with you, and wonderful discussion the other day on the Lex Fridman show. Remember to leave a like here and leave a like on the Lex podcast as well. So he might be
I'm
interested.
leaving a like right
leave
now.
A like, yeah. All right, no time to talk about Lex Fridman and his awkwardity today, but it's coming. It's coming next time. Coming up at 10 p.m. UK time, Cutting Edge with Lee Pearson. The topic is the will to perceive, vision and volition, with special guest Dr. Bob Stubberfield. And then took me like 5 minutes to read that because it's like a number of titles blend together. Anyway, yeah, that's coming up at 10 p.m. UK time. And then tomorrow on the Daily Objective, it's the Thursday Collective with Amanda Maxim, Jonathan Honig, Nikos, the Don Watkins, and special guest.
Oh, no, you didn't realize. Razi told me I'm not cool enough for this week's Collective, so I'm out.
Well, sorry, you're not cool enough. But special guest Paul Gay, the writer of The Little Rascals. So great to see him coming back, and hopefully I'll get to tell him about this movie pitch idea I have sometime soon. All right, yeah, I thought about Razi as an analogy the other day. I can't remember it now. Something about how like dictatorship and I can't remember, but it was something about how like the relationship between a dictator and his subjects is kind of like Razi and us or something like that. Anyway, I don't know why I'm even sharing this if I can't remember it. Thank you all. We are out of time. Enjoy, leave a like. Thank you for the super chats, and goodbye.